morning and welcome back to the lecture series. So, we are discussing science fiction in the light of Donna Haraway's essay, Cyborg Manifesto. In continuation from our previous lecture, we see that cyborg is a hybrid of militarism and patriarchal capitalism, and yet it is not exceedingly faithful to either. Cyborg is located at a point where human and animal boundary line is transgressed. And rather than walling off humanity from animaldom, cyborg renders a special status to bestiality, right? So it is no longer a homocentric world. The human body bears animal traits and vice versa. The borderline between organism and machine is blurred. In the age of dependence on microelectronics, there are only copies without originals. So we could see the symptom of simulacrum in the cyborg. Cyborg is very much symptomatic of the postmodern era in which simulation does not correspond either with the real or the truth. So, rather we are looking at simulation as inaugurated by a liquidation of all referentials. So, simulation entails artificial resurrection of referentials in the system of, or rather in the systems of science. It refers to the hyperreal without an original reference. If we go back to the origin of the postmodern era, what led to the postmodern, postmodernism as a movement, postmodernism in art and culture, we see that the post-industrial age and cultures since the end of the 1950s marks changing conditions of knowledge and an entry into the postmodern conditions. It is almost simultaneous with or coeval with the reconstruction of Europe, the European society. Having largely eliminated the agricultural workforce, post-industrial age is defined by manufacturing employment through creating new automated technology. So, what happens with the introduction of automatons in the post-industrial society? The automatons increase manufacturing productivity, but at the same time, the automatons or the machines displace human workforce. So, Donna Haraway extrapolates this condition of machine replacing human workforce, human productivity, to humans themselves becoming mechanized and then partly machines. The body parts having some electronic devices, some technical devices in them. In the cybernetic cosmos, labor becomes robotics, sexuality becomes genetic engineering, and mind becomes artificial intelligence. So, communication science and biology has blurred this gap between machine and organism. Mind, body and tool are all on intimate terms and they are interwoven. The boundaries between base and superstructure, public and private, material and ideal are also subsequently blurred. So, in the late 20th century, machines are disturbingly lively, whereas human beings are very surprisingly inert. So the machine, the margin between what is artificial, what is synthetic and what is natural or organic is getting increasingly unclear. The cyborg myth basically tends to undermine and crack open the innocence, the pristinity of nature and primitive culture in a very significant fashion. The authoritative Western epistemology's centrality is thereby transcended with the concept of the cyborg. So, we see, however, that who the cyborg will be is a matter of survival. In other words, whosoever survives in and as the post-Western world. And this post-Western world is a world with reshuffled rules of gender, race, ethnicity, etc. Cyborg is therefore a creature in the post-gender world which has no origin story in the Western sense. Now, movements for animal rights points to this connection that cyborg is bringing in between the nature and the culture. And this kind of interspersing nature with culture opposes the Christian or biblical creationism, in which man is shown to be at the center of the world and the nature is at his disposal. This is homocentrism. This is also androcentrism. Uh, Instead, movements for animal rights point towards biocentrism. So, while deep ecologists oppose anthropocentrism in general, we see that ecofeminists oppose male centeredness or androcentrism. A cyborg world is not afraid of a joint kinship with animals and machines. So, human body kind of tied up with or linked to animals or machines, and it is also not afraid of permanently fractional identities and contradictory standpoints. The cyborg world directly flows out of and into the postmodern artistic conditions defined through features such as anti-story or non-narrative, where meaning is not immediate and a priori, right? And such postmodern aesthetics is burdened therefore with artifice and complex symbolic meanings. The meaning lies in mimicry or constant deferment or doubling. Uh, we also see that in postmodern art, linearity is replaced by the time being arrested in an eternal present situation, from which there is neither a movement, a productive or fruitful movement towards the future, nor a recoursing in a very significant way to the past. There is a focus on dystopian narrative as well, without suggesting any way out of it. So, in the 20th century US scientific culture, the boundary line between human and animal world is completely overtaken, completely breached. So, people no longer feel the need for any separation between the two. And feminist culture seeks pleasure in connection of human and other living creatures. And its origin, the origin of blurring these boundaries that specify categories, could be seen in the radical libertarian school, which stresses on androgynous persons and thereby assumes both good and bad qualities of men and women in all the persons, right? In fact, for example, we have Jordan Freeman stressing on becoming androgynous person and celebrates a term such as a derogatory term such as bitch, which contains ample traits of masculinity such as arrogance and brashness, actually prevents the female from being traditionally a sweet person or a caring, sympathetic person. So, the essential unity of gender, race, class has given away, and hence there is nothing about being female which naturally binds women across all the different intersections. So, we have multiple sites or multiple cases or points of jeopardy. We don't have one woman's problem anymore. We don't have a unified feminist issue or kind of development. So, there are multiple points of development, multiple simultaneous development. The development of feminism is not in a unilinear direction. So, each category of gender, race, and class are formed through contradictory social realities of patriarchy, colonialism, and capitalism. Fragmentation within feminism has caused womanhood itself to become an elusive category within which one woman can dominate the other. As an example, we see that the socialist and the Marxist feminists. So, for example, we see that the socialist feminists point out how the bourgeois woman is not unified with the proletarian woman or the proletarian sister, but rather with the bourgeois man for the protection of private property, profiteering, militarism, and for propagating racism. So, primary oppressor for the proletarian woman is not patriarchy but capitalism. Now, the cyborg does not limit itself to boundaries of identity or identities. In other words, there is no obsession with pure experience. There is no pure experience anymore as a simulacrum. It can only have a doubled meaning, a displaced experience, an experience which cannot trace back to an original referent. So, pure woman, pure human, these are all elusive categories. Existence is assumed as irreversibly hybrid, and consequently, the cyborg defies a social formation through categories of binary differentiations such as man, woman, human, animal, and so forth. The sophistication and intelligence of the machines and their capabilities lead to breaking down of the idea of bodies which end at the skin or paring away of the definition of human, right? The human as a definition is revisited, it is paired off, and it is no longer restricted only to the skin of the human. Sheila Sandoval's formation of new political voice called women of color signifies breakdown of the Western male-centric world, and instead it constructs a postmodernist identity out of otherness, difference, and out of the desire to focus on specificity. Rather than relativism or pluralism, Sheila Sandoval's oppositional consciousness is about contradictory locations. So, the woman of color has no essential criteria for defining who she is. Her position will be defined through negative identities by the non-black privileged people. The author here is looking for a brand of socialist feminism which supports incomplete, contradictory, open-ended constructions which center, personal and collective selves, not one self but multiple selves, right? Because put it very simply, whenever we have a subject formation of the non-white, it is generally put in opposition to the white, and it reifies the binarism. So, the subject formation is not definitive and not forever. In critics such as Sheila Sandoval, we see, incomplete, contradictory, open-ended subject construction or identity formation. Cyborg feminists, according to Donna Haraway, should argue that we as women do not want any natural unity in the development of feminism or in the discussion of the feminist problem, and that no one whole construction is possible. There is no construction is whole as such. So, women's relation to the world and history is restructured through science and technology. as in the cyborg world, there is rearrangement of race, sex, and class in high-tech social relations. Familiar groupings are broken and new collectivities are formed due to the fast mobility of capital. So, proliferation of information processing machines, which is very much symptomatic of the postmodern era, have an effect on the way learning or knowledge is circulated, as well as on uh, all other kinds of circulation. Let's see, human circulation is also facilitated. The transportation system becomes more sophisticated. People move from one part of the world to another more quickly. And with the media, the uh, the fact that we are bombarded with information, there is circulation of sounds and visual images at very high frequency. These are all happening at the onset of the postmodern era. Professional and scientific knowledge becomes the most marketable commodity during this era. So, under postmodern conditions, knowledge is produced in order to be sold. It is consumed in order to be valorized or celebrated in a new production. The goal of acquiring any knowledge is exchange. Knowledge therefore ceases to be an end in itself. Knowledge ceases to be an end in itself. Uh, it loses its use value and attains instead an exchange value. From here, Haraway is also looking at the prototypical Silicon Valley. She is looking at the case of the women who work in the Silicon Valley. The lives of such women comprise heterosexual monogamy, negotiating childcare, uh, a distance from family and traditional community, and in the end there is loneliness and economic vulnerability as they age. So, Richard Gordon talks of a homework economy in which factory, home and market are integrated on a new scale, and here the places for women are crucial. New communications and homework economy is an onslaught or an attack on, and a process of decentralization from white men's unionized jobs, the traditional unions that are formed, whose chief architects and protagonists are white men. Homework economy is a move away from the unionized jobs of white men. So, in industrial societies, we see men are in fact more vulnerable to job loss than the women. So, cyborg manifesto, or the cybernetic world, the world of cybernetic organism, uh, sees you know cross race and cross gender alliances as very important, necessary for sustenance of life. Haraway notes how women survive outside of a unitary self, within dispersion and within a diaspora, a diasporic condition, such as one can see in the case of the prototypical Silicon Valley. So, although it is useful in imagining a departure from traditional categories of difference, the concept of cyborg, one has to remember, is itself fraught with a Western patriarchal violence which cannot be ignored in the greater context of technology and technological innovation. If a cyborg is originally a military invention, then the conceptualization of the female body as the cyborg is only a product of the idea of industrial war machine, which has violence intrinsically associated with it. The concept of cyborg has violence and war and militarism intrinsically associated with it. So, the nature of such a violence therefore replaces imperialism with the military. Mechanism of war and technology enable formation of family through army and technology, and Haraway calls such propagation caused by militaristic discourse as government issued children. And Haraway hints that in the cybernetic world, new pleasures, new experiences, and powers emerge as the rule of the game changes and keep changing. The units of socialist feminist analysis, which are the race, gender, and class, are constantly undergoing transformations. They are in a state of flux, which leads to emergence of new kinds of unity, new kinds of power groups, if we may. So rather than being a feminist with a common language among the women and thus totalized and imperialized outlook, Donna Haraway studies how to survive within contradictions, where, let's say, human body itself, the basic assumptions of all categories are reshuffled. The human body merges with animals and further merges with machines. And this is also a way of disarming or disempowering the Western male centric viewpoint. The traditional categories, existence of traditional categories such as class, sex or gender, race, reify the Western male centric viewpoint, and this is what gets foiled or frustrated when the categories are reshuffled, when the entire power game, the rule of the game is changed. When seen from women's point of view, the cyborg world is free from virulent forms of oppression, at least the virulent forms of oppression that women have traditionally and historically faced. It is symptomatic of the alternate path that is shown by science and technology, where science could also play a feminized role. There is a point where Donna Haraway says that I would rather be a cyborg than a goddess, which marks the departure of the idea of the woman as a natural, biologically driven, essentialized goddess of the earth, and embraces the potential of science and technology in providing a shifted idea of the woman. This is a rejection of the nature driven idea of the woman or the goddess, and replacing it with the cyborg. However, the question remains, is the cyborg replacing one system of control with another? Because cyborg is an image of both imagination and material reality. It reflects the tradition of racist male dominant capitalism too. Just like it reflects the tradition of progress, the tradition of appropriation of nature as reproduction of culture. So, drawing on the pre-1990s technophobia and post-1990s technophilia, sociologist Judy Weichmann emphasizes the social studies of technology, and Weichmann insists avoidance of both technological determinism and gender essentialism in order to understand a fluid and flexible gender technology relationship. In her words, I quote Weichmann, the possibility and the fluidity of gender discourse in the virtual world is constrained by the material world, unquote. So, when technology is predominantly controlled and created by men, the question of material constraints set the limits to how much agency technology is capable of granting in redefining race, gender, and sexuality. Because technology, put very plainly, is the domain of has always been the domain of the male, and it has been, the medium of expressing very masculinist, male centric ideas. It has facilitated wars, militarism, all of which are offshoots of patriarchy. So the cyborg could be seen as existing in the liminal space, not oppositionally but frictionally against other subjects and identities. Like I was saying, critics have seen this idea of cyborg as a self-serving offshoot of liberal feminism, which talks about gadgets and movements in technoscientific ecosystem through looking at the animus and the automaton as an extension of each other. Critics like Julia de Cook note that Haraway's notion of personhood is deeply seated in the Western concepts. So, universality of the cyborg is problematic, as the cyborg allows for the centrality of white identity and a techno-utopic worldview where technology is seen as emancipatory and technology is not examined for its limitations. So, what de Kock is trying to get at is that technology could have its own limitations. The concept of cyborg could have its flip side too. In her work, Race After Technology, Abolitionist Tools for the New Jim Code, Rua Benjamin shows how technological designs can be discriminatory and in fact they can perpetuate inequality or iniquity through amplifying racial hierarchies. Donna Haraway is not pointing to the many lapses of technology in the process of fixing older problems. So, technology is being deployed to fix old problems of race and gender, but technology has its own baggage of problems, which is something Haraway does not address in her essay. So, technology and the desire to create and control machines is a realm that is, very prominently dominated by the man, and thus technology itself may inherently be patriarchal, like Weichmann observes. So, questions that come to our mind are as follows. Is women's participation in cyberspace and the technological sphere disruptive of the very basis on which technology is built? Does it debunk the problematics associated with technology? Or is it merely, as Audre Lorde very correctly puts, very significantly puts, a futile attempt at dismantling the master's house with the master's tools? So, we are trying to challenge patriarchy with a tool of patriarchy that technology itself is. So, the cyborg is supposed to shift the essentialized notions of gender and sex away from the body. But does the technological revolution of the late 20th and early 21st century further reify rather than move away from or challenge these definitions? What possibilities can the woman, the people of color, the disabled, the queer persons find in science, technology, and the cybernetic identity, the cyborg identity? How much access to technology do people from these categories have, upon which the concept of cyborg is built? Unequal technological access could, in fact, exacerbate, worsen uh, the social inequality. So, does the cyborg enable dismantling of traditional confines of identity and categorization of existence across all levels? This is something we need to understand and ask. According to ecofeminist Vandana Shiva, a spiritual, ecofeminist that she is, cyborg promotes a reductionist constructivism in its garb of integrating women's problems. So, Vandana Shiva looks at how global power structures and the destructive logic of technoscience tends to engulf the sacred feminine principle called as Prakriti or nature, as imagined in the ancient Indian cosmology. Further, Nina Likhi argues that the cyborg and the goddess, we could call it the goddess or the Devi, which is the one as a proponent of, science or technology, whereas the other as the proponent of nature. So the cyborg being the proponent of science and technology, whereas the goddess or Devi being the proponent of nature or Prakriti, are not as dissimilar as they may appear. This is what Likhi has to say. In fact, they have much in common. Feminists that are working within the techno-scientific paradigm cannot really privilege cyborg over the goddess or vice versa. We would like to stop our discussion here today and let's meet for another round of discussions in another lecture. Thank you.